For 7 years, I was the silent engine behind my husband's dream. While he spoke on stages and wore tailored suits, I worked behind the curtains, managing clients, fixing budgets, polishing presentations, and turning sleepless nights into his shining mornings. He was the face. I was the foundation. When we married, he said, "We'll build something together." I believed him. Every plan, every investment, every risk, I stood beside him, not because I wanted credit, but because I believed in us. I believed in the word together. But success changes people in slow, invisible ways. One day, it's just a different tone when he talks. Then it's missing dinners. Then it's, "I've got this, you don't need to worry." Until suddenly, you realize you're no longer part of the story you helped write. It started with the company's rebranding. The new logo, the website, the contracts, all registered under his name. I asked about it once, gently. He smiled and said, "It's just easier for the paperwork." I wanted to believe that, but something in his voice didn't sound like the man I married. Still, I stayed. Because love teaches you patience, and dreams demand loyalty. Until the morning the envelope arrived. I was sorting invoices when I noticed it, thick, official paper with my name in bold. I tore it open, thinking it was some business notice. But it wasn't. It was a summons. My husband had taken me to court for ownership theft. I stared at the pages, reading words that didn't make sense. He claimed I had misused company funds, that I'd acted beyond my position. The man I'd built a life with had turned me into his enemy on paper. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I just sat there, in the same office I had decorated for him 7 years ago, surrounded by awards that carried his name but my fingerprints. My chest felt hollow, not from shock but from understanding. He hadn't changed overnight. He'd been changing all along. I just refused to see it. The first hearing was surreal. He walked in with that same confidence I'd once admired, polished, proud, pretending I was a stranger. His lawyer called me the assistant. My lawyer called me the co-founder. And somewhere between those words, I realized I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for the truth. Every photo, every email, every sleepless night became evidence. Not of crime, but of devotion. They tried to twist it all. She was never officially hired, his lawyer said. She managed operations, my lawyer replied. She was compensated through marriage benefits, they argued. I almost laughed. Marriage benefits. 7 years of unpaid labor now reduced to a favor. But I stayed quiet, because I knew something they didn't. There was one file, one tiny forgotten detail, that could change everything. And I had it. It was an old presentation draft, the first pitch we ever made. The title slide read, DreamWorks Ventures, founded by Ethan and Lila. Both names. Side by side. The original idea. The spark before ego took over. When my lawyer presented that file, I didn't look at my husband. I looked at the judge. I wanted her to see the truth behind the silence. That this wasn't revenge. This was recognition. Days passed between hearings. Nights were quieter than they had ever been. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how love could turn into litigation. How someone could erase the person who built them. On the third day of the trial, he avoided my eyes. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe not. But when his voice cracked on the stand, saying, "She misunderstood my intentions," I realized something powerful. Guilt doesn't fix betrayal, it just exposes it. I remembered the early years, making coffee at 2 a.m., typing proposals while he practiced speeches, telling him he'd make it big. And now, standing in that courtroom, I wasn't his supporter anymore. I was his reflection, showing him what he'd become. My lawyer asked me to speak. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. I said, "I didn't come here to win. I came here to remind him of who we were before the applause drowned the truth." The courtroom went silent. Even the judge paused. I wasn't performing. I was releasing 7 years of unspoken pain, neatly folded into a single sentence. Because when someone takes everything from you, your effort, your trust, your identity, the only thing left to give is truth. When the verdict came, it wasn't what anyone expected. The court recognized my contribution as foundational. Half the ownership, half the assets. Legally, I was now equal. But emotionally, the victory felt hollow. Because how do you celebrate winning something you built out of love, not ambition? As I left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. I didn't answer. I just smiled, not the way I used to when I was proud of him, but the way people smile when they finally stop bleeding. That night, I sat alone in the same living room where our journey began. The framed photo of us on our first office day still hung on the wall. He was pointing at the camera, laughing. I was holding the blueprint, smiling. We looked unstoppable. I thought of all the moments I'd given up, birthdays, weekends, even my health, to help him chase his vision. And now that I had half of it on paper, it felt weightless. Success without trust is just paperwork. I didn't hate him, not even after everything, because hate keeps you tied to what hurt you. I wanted freedom, not revenge. So I packed the file, the verdict papers, and the first blueprint, and left. No dramatic goodbye. No message. Just quiet closure. People think betrayal breaks you, but it doesn't. It rebuilds you differently. Stronger. Sharper. Clearer. I walked away not as a shadow, but as my own light. And as I closed the door behind me, one thought echoed louder than any applause we'd ever received. He took me to court to erase me, but all he did was write my name in history. The first morning after the verdict felt unreal. No calls, no meetings, no chaos, just silence. The kind of silence that makes you realize how much noise you used to mistake for life. I brewed coffee the way I always did for him, but halfway through I stopped. The cup wasn't his anymore. It was mine. The world outside was loud, though. Articles flooded in. Power couple split after legal battle. Wife wins half of husband's company. Love turned lawsuit. Everyone had a headline, but no one had the truth. They didn't see the nights I stitched his dreams together while losing pieces of myself. They didn't see the bruises of exhaustion hidden behind my calm. Still, for the first time in years, I didn't rush to fix anything. I sat with the quiet, letting it stretch and breathe. Healing doesn't begin when the pain ends. It begins when you stop explaining it. Days turned into weeks, and something unexpected happened. Messages started arriving from women I'd never met, founders, assistants, even homemakers, all saying the same thing. Your story gave me courage. I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't planned to be an example. I just wanted to survive. But somehow, my survival became someone else's permission to rise. So, I began writing. Not a business plan this time, a story. My story. I poured every detail, every scar, every lesson into words. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Because what they took from me wasn't just credit, it was voice. And I was finally learning to use mine again. By the third week, an old client reached out. He said, "Lila, you are the reason our project ever worked. If you ever start something on your own, call me first." I smiled, politely, but inside, something lit up. A quiet spark. The same one that had built everything once before, only now it burned for me. I rented a small office. Nothing fancy. Just 2 desks, a flickering light, and a dream without permission. I didn't have capital, but I had clarity. And sometimes clarity is the sharpest currency there is. On the first day, I wrote one sentence on the whiteboard. Built from broken, stronger than ever. It wasn't a slogan. It was a promise. The early weeks were slow. Some people didn't take my calls. Others whispered behind my back, saying I'd only succeeded because of my husband. They didn't know that every file in his empire had once passed through my hands. They didn't know that the foundation they praised him for was poured with my sleepless nights. But I didn't argue, because people only see what they're ready to see, and I was done performing for their vision. Months later, I got an invitation, a business summit. Ironically, the same event I used to attend by his side. The same stage where I once stood in the shadows, fixing his mic, making sure the spotlight hit just right. Only this time, the invitation had my name printed on it, keynote speaker, Lila Thompson. When I walked into that auditorium, every camera turned. Some people smiled with surprise, others whispered. I could feel his presence even before I saw him, sitting in the front row, watching. The same man who once said, "You're not made for the stage." I didn't plan a speech. I spoke from memory. I said, "Dreams are not partnerships when only one person's name is allowed to shine." I spent years building something that was never meant to belong to one person. It belonged to every late night, every sacrifice, every voice that wasn't heard. And if you've ever been told you're replaceable, remember, even the most powerful building collapses when its foundation walks away. The hall went silent. Then applause erupted, not the polite kind, but the kind that shakes walls. He didn't clap. He just sat there frozen. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, because he finally saw what he'd thrown away, not a partner, but a legacy. After the event, he approached me outside. The same confident walk, but the arrogance was gone. He said, "You did great." I didn't realize. I stopped him. "You realized. You just didn't care until you lost it." He looked down, then whispered, "Are you happy now?" I thought for a moment and said, "No, not happy. Whole." Then I turned and left. No drama, no music, just a quiet ending he'd never get to rewrite. From that day, everything changed. The same investors who once ignored me began reaching out. My small office grew into a company of 20, then 50, then 100. But I didn't call it revenge. I called it balance, because every win now carried peace, not proof. Sometimes I drive past our old house. The windows were still there, the porch light still flickering. It used to feel like home. Now it looked like history. And history doesn't hurt when you've outgrown it. One evening, as I locked up my new office, my assistant asked, "What's the secret, Lila? How did you not give up?" I smiled and said, "Because I already gave everything once. This time, I'm giving it to myself." I didn't rebuild to compete. I rebuilt to remember. To remember that worth isn't measured by who claps for you. It's measured by how you stand when no one does. Months later, I received one more letter. Not from the court, from him. It said, "You were right. I lost sight of us. I hope you're doing well." I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because closure doesn't need an audience. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with the old blueprint, the one that once carried both our names. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain when I looked at it. I felt gratitude. Because sometimes life breaks you just enough to reveal the parts that were never supposed to bend. Years passed and my company flourished. Awards, features, recognition. All came, but none mattered as much as peace. Because peace was the one thing I could never buy back when I was with him. Now, when people ask me about the lawsuit, I don't tell them about the verdict. I tell them about the silence that followed, and how that silence became the birthplace of everything I truly wanted. And when they ask if I'd ever do it all again, I say yes. Every tear, every betrayal, every scar, because it led me here, to this version of me, the one who no longer builds for others, the one who builds and names it her own. He once said, "You'll never make it without me." I smile every time I walk into my office, the one with my name on every wall, and whisper to myself, "Funny, I did more than make it. I became everything you said I couldn't." And that's when I realized something beautiful. The strongest revenge isn't success. It's serenity.